Money destroys everything. Even legends fall when billions whisper their name. Rafael Nadal, the mentor who promised loyalty, the icon who built champions, just shattered the heart of Ayala for a check so massive it rewrote tennis history. $3 billion, one impossible choice, and the Filipino rising star left standing alone, wondering if she ever truly mattered at all. This isn't just betrayal. This is the moment tennis discovered every relationship has a price tag. Nobody predicted this partnership. When Ayala first connected with Rafael Nadal 3 years ago, the tennis world barely noticed. She was a teenage hopeful from the Philippines, grinding through challenger tournaments, desperate for breakthrough momentum. He was already immortal. 22 Grand Slams, a legacy carved in clay, nothing left to prove. Yet something clicked between them that transcended rankings and resumes. Their connection began at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca. Eala wasn't just another scholarship student passing through the gates. Nadal saw fire in her eyes that reminded him of his younger self, that relentless hunger, that refusal to accept limitations. He started appearing courtside during her practice sessions, offering adjustments to her forehand, teaching her the mental warfare that separated champions from contenders. Other coaches noticed. Nadal never gave this kind of attention freely. What made their bond extraordinary wasn't technical guidance. Anyone could teach mechanics. Nadal gave Eala something infinitely more valuable: belief. When she doubted herself after brutal losses, when injuries threatened to derail her momentum, when the pressure of representing an entire nation became suffocating, Nadal reminded her why she belonged. He shared stories of his own darkest moments, the times he questioned whether his body could endure another season, the criticism that nearly broke his spirit. He told her that champions aren't born in victory, they're forged in the fires of doubt and desperation. Their relationship transformed Ayla's game. Her ranking climbed from outside the top 500 to knocking on the door of the top 100. She started winning matches she would have surrendered 12 months earlier. Commentators noticed the Nadal influence, the same ferocious intensity, the same refusal to concede a single point without warfare. She began carrying herself differently, speaking with newfound conviction in press conferences. When asked about her improvement, Ayla's answer never changed. Rafa believed in me when nobody else did. He taught me that greatness isn't about talent, it's about choosing to suffer longer than your opponent. Nadal rarely spoke publicly about their work together. He preferred privacy, protecting their dynamic from media scrutiny and outside pressure. But those close to both revealed something deeper than coaching. This was mentorship in its purest form, a legend investing his wisdom, time, and emotional energy into someone else's dream. Eala wasn't family. She wasn't Spanish. She brought Nadal no strategic advantage, no business opportunity, no career benefit. He helped her because he saw potential worth nurturing, because he understood the loneliness of fighting upward through tennis's brutal hierarchy. Friends of Eala described her devotion to Nadal in almost sacred terms. She structured her entire schedule around opportunities to train with him. She studied his matches obsessively, dissecting not just his technique, but his psychology, how he manufactured intensity, how he intimidated opponents before points even began. She adopted his rituals, his preparation habits, his philosophy that every practice session deserved Grand Slam focus. Tennis insiders whispered that Eala had become Nadal's unofficial protege, the player he was quietly preparing to inherit his warrior mentality. The bond seemed unbreakable. Nadal attended her matches when his schedule allowed, sending encouragement before critical tournaments, celebrating her victories like they were his own. Eala spoke about him with reverence that bordered on worship, calling him the greatest influence on her career, the person who transformed her from prospect into predator. Their connection represented everything beautiful about tennis: the passing of wisdom across generations, the selfless investment in another's success, the idea that legacy isn't just about trophies, but about the champions you help create. Then, the WTA made an offer that weaponized every ounce of that trust. What happens when the mentor who taught you loyalty gets tested by more money than entire countries possess? Keep watching, because what comes next exposes the brutal truth about relationships in professional sports. The WTA had been hemorrhaging relevance for years. Viewership declined, sponsorship deals collapsed, younger audiences ignored women's tennis entirely, captivated instead by social media personalities and esports competitions. Desperation breeds radical thinking, and WTA executives conceived a plan so audacious it seemed impossible. Hire Rafael Nadal as the global ambassador and strategic architect of women's tennis, not as a figurehead, as the actual leader reshaping everything: marketing, tournament structure, player development, global expansion. One person with the credibility, vision, and star power to resurrect women's tennis from irrelevance. The offer? $3 billion over 10 years. Let that number sink in. Not $3 million, not $300 million. $3 billion. The largest contract in tennis history by an almost incomprehensible margin. The deal included equity stakes in WTA broadcasting rights, profit participation from expanded tournaments, and complete creative authority over women's tennis's future direction. Nadal would become more than an employee. He'd become a partner, a decision-maker, a revolutionary force with unlimited resources and institutional backing. WTA executives pitched the vision with religious fervor. Nadal's involvement would shatter skepticism about women's tennis. His reputation for integrity would restore credibility. His understanding of champion mentality would elevate player development. His global fan base would create instant visibility for WTA events. They painted a picture of transformation, packed stadiums, billion-dollar broadcast deals. A new generation inspired by Nadal's commitment to women's tennis. This wasn't just a contract, this was salvation disguised as employment. The offer came with brutal conditions. Nadal would need to commit completely. Full-time presence, no distractions, total focus on WTA objectives. That meant eliminating outside commitments that competed for his attention, energy, or loyalty. Personal coaching arrangements? Incompatible with his new responsibilities. Private mentorship of individual players? A conflict of interest that undermined his impartiality as WTA's leader. The contract language was explicit. Accepting this position required severing any coaching relationships that create appearance of favoritism or divided loyalties. Translation? Choosing the WTA meant abandoning Ayah. Nadal initially dismissed the proposal as fantasy. He'd spent his entire career avoiding administrative roles, resisting pressure to become a spokesperson or executive. Coaching the next generation through his academy brought him joy, but bureaucracy and corporate politics repulsed him. He told WTA representatives he wasn't interested in becoming tennis's savior. He'd earned the right to control his post-retirement life on his own terms, pursuing only commitments that genuinely inspired him. But $3 billion doesn't whisper, it screams. The WTA returned with revised offers, each iteration more lucrative, each presentation more persuasive. They brought data showing how women's tennis was dying, how the sport desperately needed someone with Nadal's stature to justify its existence. They appealed to his legacy, suggesting that saving women's tennis would cement his greatness beyond anything he accomplished as a player. They framed the decision as moral responsibility. Did he care enough about tennis's future to make personal sacrifices for the sport that gave him everything? Nadal began wavering. Friends noticed the shift in his demeanor during private conversations. He started questioning whether continuing small-scale mentorship made sense when he could impact thousands of players through systemic change. The money obviously mattered. Even billionaires noticed $3 billion. But the pitch went deeper. This was about relevance, purpose, legacy. Did he want to be remembered as a great player who faded into comfortable retirement, or as the visionary who rescued an entire sport from extinction? The internal conflict intensified. Nadal valued loyalty above almost everything, yet the WTA appealed to a different kind of loyalty, his obligation to tennis itself, to the women who deserved the same opportunities and recognition that men enjoyed. Declining the offer meant protecting one relationship at the expense of countless others. Accepting meant betraying someone he trusted completely, but potentially saving something far larger than any individual bond. For weeks, Nadal agonized in silence. He didn't consult Eala because the conversation would destroy her before he'd made any decision. He didn't seek advice from fellow players because their input would leak, creating premature controversy. He wrestled alone with the impossible mathematics of loyalty. How do you weigh one person's trust against billions of dollars and the future of women's tennis? The WTA set a deadline. Nadal requested extensions, buying time to reconcile the irreconcilable. But eventually, numbers and pressure converged into a singular truth he could no longer avoid. The opportunity was too massive, too historic, too consequential to refuse based on personal relationships. Champions make hard choices. Legends prioritize legacy over comfort. Rafael Nadal accepted the offer, and Ayala's world shattered. The decision is made, but how do you tell someone who worships you that their trust was worth exactly $3 billion? The confrontation ahead reveals why some wounds never heal. Ayala discovered the news the cruelest possible way, through Twitter. Not from Nadal, not from her management team, from a WTA press release announcing Nadal's historic appointment, celebrating the partnership that would transform women's tennis forever. The statement mentioned his commitment to eliminating conflicts of interest, ensuring impartial leadership uncompromised by personal relationships. Corporate language, lawyer-approved phrasing. Zero humanity. She read it 3 times before the reality penetrated. Her mentor, the person she credited with resurrecting her career, the man she defended against critics, the icon she structured her entire life around, had accepted a position that required abandoning her. And he hadn't bothered telling her first. She learned simultaneously with millions of strangers that their relationship was over, terminated by contractual obligation and financial incentive. The betrayal wasn't just the decision, it was the cowardice. Nadal had faced down championship pressure on the world's biggest stages, had battled injuries that would have ended weaker players, had confronted doubters and critics with unwavering confidence. Yet he couldn't summon the courage to call Ayala and explain why $3 billion mattered more than the trust she'd placed in him. He chose institutional announcement over personal conversation, public relations over private honesty. Ayala's phone erupted with messages, friends expressing shock, fellow players offering sympathy, journalists requesting comment. She ignored everything. Rage and heartbreak collided inside her chest, creating emotional chaos that made breathing difficult. She'd sacrificed everything for tennis: childhood normalcy, educational opportunities, financial stability, relationships with family who rarely saw her. And the one person who made those sacrifices feel worthwhile had just discarded her through a press release. She demanded a meeting. Nadal's team initially resisted, suggesting that emotions needed time to settle, that productive conversation required cooler heads. Ayala refused to accept delay. You owe me a conversation. Face me like the champion you claim to be, or admit you're a coward hiding behind lawyers and contracts. The accusation landed. Nadal agreed to meet privately at his academy, the same location where their bond had formed, now the site of its destruction. The confrontation lasted 90 minutes. Nobody else was present. No recording devices, no witnesses. What happened in that room remains disputed, filtered through secondhand accounts and emotional interpretation, but the core themes emerged clearly through subsequent interviews and leaked details from people close to both parties. Ayala reportedly unleashed years of suppressed emotion. She challenged everything Nadal claimed to represent: integrity, loyalty, commitment to relationships over results. You taught me that greatness means fighting for what matters, that champions don't abandon people when circumstances get difficult. Then you sold me for money. You didn't even have the decency to warn me. I had to learn through social media that I meant nothing. Nadal attempted justification. He explained the magnitude of the opportunity, the potential impact on women's tennis, the impossible position the WTA created. He insisted the decision wasn't about Ayala personally. The contract prohibited all private coaching relationships, not just hers. He was sacrificing something meaningful for something transformational. Couldn't she understand the difference between betrayal and difficult necessity? Ayala rejected every explanation. This isn't about understanding your decision. This is about realizing I never actually mattered. If our relationship meant what you claimed, you would have consulted me before accepting. You would have explored alternatives, negotiated exceptions, found some way to honor the bond we built. Instead, you calculated the value of my trust and determined it couldn't compete with $3 billion. Don't insult me by pretending this was anything other than a business transaction. The conversation deteriorated into accusations and counter-accusations. Nadal reportedly grew defensive, arguing that Ayala's emotional response proved her immaturity, her inability to think beyond personal feelings and recognize larger responsibilities. Ayala fired back that his rationalization proved his hypocrisy, the legend who built his reputation on loyalty and warrior mentality, revealing that everything had a price, that his principles dissolved when enough money appeared. Their final exchange captured the irreparable damage. Ayala asked a simple question. If you could reverse the decision right now, knowing what it cost our relationship, would you? Nadal hesitated. That pause, that fraction of silence before corporate-approved response, told Ayala everything she needed to know. He wouldn't reverse it. Given the same choice again, he'd make the identical decision. $3 billion and WTA leadership mattered more than her trust, her career, her belief in their bond. Ayala stood and walked out. She didn't slam doors or shout final condemnations. She simply left, eliminating Nadal from her life with the same efficiency he eliminated her from his. No goodbye, no future contact, just the cold termination of a relationship that once felt sacred. Within hours, cryptic social media posts began appearing. Ayala shared a quote, "Some people teach you about greatness, others teach you about betrayal. Both lessons matter." Nadal posted nothing, maintaining professional silence while his public relations team crafted careful messaging about mutual respect and understanding. But everyone in tennis understood. The bond was destroyed, and the shockwaves were just beginning. The private confrontation is over. Now the world gets to choose sides. What happens when tennis fans discover their hero abandoned the player he promised to protect? The explosion ahead makes this personal for millions. Social media detonated within hours. The tennis community, players, fans, commentators, journalists fractured into warring factions, each convinced their interpretation represented objective truth. Team Nadal versus Team Ayala, loyalty versus pragmatism, personal relationships versus professional responsibility. The controversy consumed tennis discourse completely, overshadowing actual tournaments and transforming every conversation into referendum on the betrayal. Ayala supporters attacked with ferocious intensity. They painted Nadal as the ultimate hypocrite, the legend who built his brand on humility, respect, and fighting spirit, then abandoned a young player who trusted him completely the moment enough money appeared. These fans shared old interviews where Nadal emphasized loyalty's importance, juxtaposing his words against his actions. They created viral threads documenting Ayala's devotion to Nadal, her public praise, her restructured career around his mentorship, evidence that made his abandonment seem especially cruel. Filipino tennis fans took the betrayal personally. Ayala represented their nation on the global stage, carrying the hopes of millions who saw her success as validation of their country's athletic potential. Nadal had been celebrated in the Philippines as the benevolent mentor elevating their champion. Now he was vilified as the mercenary who exploited her gratitude and then discarded her for profit. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Nadal betrayal, hashtag justice for Ayala, hashtag money over loyalty. Fan art depicted Nadal counting money while Ayala stood alone, tears streaming, abandoned. But Nadal's defenders fought back as aggressively. They argued that expecting him to reject $3 billion and historic opportunity because of one coaching relationship was absurd. Nadal didn't owe Ayala a lifetime commitment. She wasn't his daughter, wasn't family, wasn't contractually entitled to his mentorship. He'd already given her invaluable guidance that accelerated her career. Demanding he sacrifice the WTA position, but Filipino sports officials saw it differently. They viewed the UAE's approach as predatory, a wealthy nation using financial leverage to poach talent it hadn't developed. The Philippines had invested in Ayala's training since childhood. The Rafael Nadal Academy in Spain, where Ayala honed her skills, received funding from Philippine Olympic Committee resources. Now, just as she reached her peak earning years, a foreign government wanted to purchase those returns? The tension escalated when a prominent Philippine senator publicly condemned the reported offer, calling it an insult to Filipino sovereignty and an attempt to commodify our national heroes. Another politician countered, arguing that denying Ayala the opportunity to secure her family's future forever represented its own form of exploitation. Suddenly, Ayala's decision, if she even had one to make, transcended sports entirely. It became a referendum on globalization, nationalism, athlete autonomy, and whether loyalty could be measured in dollars. And nobody bothered asking what Alex Ayala actually wanted until she finally spoke. Understanding why this offer cuts so deep requires understanding what Alex Ayala represents to millions of Filipinos scattered across the Gulf states. The Philippines exports labor. Approximately 11 million Filipino overseas workers send remittances back home that total over $36 billion annually, roughly 10% of the nation's entire GDP. These workers build Dubai's skyscrapers, staff Abu Dhabi's hospitals, manage Qatar's hotels, and maintain Kuwait's households. They sacrifice proximity to families for years, sometimes decades, chasing salaries their homeland cannot provide. Most live as permanent outsiders. UAE citizenship laws rank among the world's most restrictive. Even foreigners who spend 30 years in the country remain expatriates, forever guests rather than true residents. They contribute labor and taxes, but can't vote, can't own certain properties, and always carry the implicit understanding that their presence depends on continued employment. Alex Ayala became their symbol of transcendence, proof that a Filipino could dominate in the Middle East not through service jobs, but through excellence. When she walked onto Dubai's center court, she carried the aspirations of housekeepers who took buses 3 hours each way to watch her play. When she defeated top 10 opponents, she validated the sacrifices of construction workers who sent tournament ticket money home instead of using it themselves. Her success felt collective, communal, owned by a diaspora that rarely sees itself celebrated in elite spaces. Every match became a referendum on worth. Hers, yes, but also theirs by extension. So when rumors emerged suggesting Eala might trade her Philippine passport for Emirati citizenship, the perceived betrayal hit like a personal abandonment. Social media comments from Dubai-based Filipino nurses and Doha-stationed engineers expressed variations of the same anguish. "We thought you were one of us." But other voices emerged too. Quieter, more conflicted, but no less passionate. Some Filipino overseas workers pointed out the obvious contradiction. They'd left home chasing better financial opportunities, yet now condemned Eala for considering the same calculation on a vastly larger scale. Was there a threshold where pursuing prosperity became treasonous? And who decided where that line existed? Women workers, particularly, saw complexities others missed. Female Filipino domestic workers in the UAE earn approximately $300 to $400 monthly, about $4,800 annually. Eala's reported offer would eclipse that figure roughly 1.5 million times over. For women who'd spent careers sending money home to siblings they barely knew anymore, and parents who'd aged in their absence, Eala's potential windfall represented the fantasy they'd all chased: security so complete that sacrifice could finally stop. One viral tweet captured the tension perfectly. Everybody wants their kids to get opportunities abroad until those opportunities require leaving home behind. Then, suddenly, it's betrayal. Which is it? The UAE's Filipino community fractured along ideological fault lines. Nationalists organized protests outside the Philippine consulate, demanding Eala reject the offer publicly. Pragmatists argued that criticizing a 20-year-old woman for considering life-changing wealth reeked of hypocrisy from people who had made similar, smaller-scale versions of the same choice. And caught in the center of this maelstrom stood Eala herself, suddenly responsible for resolving contradictions that Filipino society had never managed to reconcile about labor migration, national identity, and the price of belonging. Then, Dubai made its move official, and everything accelerated beyond control. February 25, 2026. The Burj Khalifa's observation deck, cameras from 47 countries, a podium bearing both UAE and Dubai Sports Council insignias, and a conspicuous empty chair beside Dubai's Minister of Youth and Sports. The press conference was called with 18 hours' notice, barely enough time for international media to book flights, but precisely enough time to generate maximum speculation. Nobody knew who would sit in that empty chair. Some journalists assumed Coco Gauff, given recent Dubai tournament successes. Others speculated about Iga Swiatek or Ariana Sabalenka relocating training bases. Nobody guessed correctly until Alexandra Ayala walked through the doors wearing a white pantsuit and an expression that revealed absolutely nothing. The arena erupted. Cameras flashed like a strobe light convention. Journalists shouted questions in 6 languages simultaneously, none intelligible over the chaos. Eala took her seat beside the minister, folded her hands on the table, and waited for silence that took 4 minutes to arrive. When she finally spoke, her voice carried steel nobody had heard before in her cheerful post-match interviews. I want to be extremely clear about something. I have not signed any contract with the UAE government. I have not agreed to change my citizenship. I am and remain proud to represent the Philippines. Relief swept through Filipino journalists. Vindication seemed complete, until Eala continued speaking. However, I would be lying if I said I haven't thought seriously about the opportunities presented, and I would be lying if I pretended the criticism I faced from some corners hasn't hurt deeply. I've given everything to Philippine tennis. I've trained since I was 6 years old. I've missed birthdays, graduations, and family gatherings. I've played through injuries that should have sidelined me for months. And now I'm being told that even considering financial security makes me a traitor? The minister remained impassive, but his presence communicated volumes. This wasn't Eala rejecting Dubai's offer. This was Eala calling out the Philippines for making her feel guilty about attracting it. I've read comments saying I owe my success to the Philippines. I've seen people claim that accepting this offer would constitute stealing resources from a nation that invested in me. But let me share some math. My total career prize money is approximately $1.49 million. That's before taxes, coaching fees, training expenses, travel costs, equipment, physiotherapy, and agent commissions. My net earnings from tennis after 7 years on the professional circuit are roughly $400,000. She let that number hang in the air. The offer I received from Dubai is 17,500 times larger than my lifetime tennis earnings. 17,500 times. And I'm supposed to reject it without hesitation because questioning my loyalty hurts people's feelings? The room went silent. This wasn't the smiling, gracious champion who thanked fans in post-match interviews. This was a woman exhausted by impossible expectations. I haven't made any decisions. I'm also done apologizing for having decisions to make. If that makes me selfish, so be it. Everyone else has permission to prioritize their family's security. Apparently, I don't. She stood, ignored the tsunami of shouted questions, and walked out. The minister never said a word. He didn't need to. Eala's speech accomplished exactly what Dubai wanted, positioning the UAE as the reasonable party offering opportunity, while the Philippines looked like crabs in a bucket pulling down anyone trying to climb out. The backlash was immediate and brutal, and it changed everything.